Hi, welcome back to the podcast. Have you ever felt burnt out? You know, that feeling where everything just feels like too much. Of course you have. We all have. And what does burnout look like for you? Is it feeling exhausted all the time? Or maybe you've noticed that you just don't have the motivation that you used to. How do you feel when you're in that space? And when you recognize that you're actually burnt out, what did you do to feel better? Did you take a break? Did you ask for help? Or maybe you're still in the thick of it. Are you? Today we're going to talk about how burnout sneaks up on you and how to recognize the signs early and what you can do to keep it from happening again. You might be experiencing burnout right now and wondering if you'll ever bounce back. I'm Kate Mason and welcome to Parenting and Personalities. This is the podcast that connects you to the ones you care about the most. Today's guest is Unna Goldsworthy, founder of Unna Movement. With an undergraduate degree in exercise science and a master's in rehabilitation, Unna's journey spans over 20 years, including clinical practice, research, and establishing a successful rehab and Pilates practice. Unna's philosophy centres on the idea that true health success isn't all about physical exercise, but it's about connecting the body and the mind to optimise performance, true health, and well-being, even when things aren't perfect. Unna now focuses on empowering individuals through a holistic approach to health and self-awareness. She helps people answer the important questions like, how am I getting in my own way? And what is my body telling me? Through a top-down, bottom-up approach, Unna fosters a sustainable relationship with health, empowering clients to thrive in both personal and professional growth. Hi Unna, welcome to Parenting and Personalities. It's lovely to have you here with us today.
Hi, Kate. Thanks for having me.
It's a pleasure. Now, what I want to do is, first of all, I want to find out a little bit about you. Can you share a bit of your background with us? Did you start off wanting to work in the health industry, or did you have other ideas when you first started your career or when you were younger? How did it all start?
It's funny because I was thinking about this even just yesterday. I think some people go about choosing their career because they know what a title means, or they've got a score, that they're aiming for. And I vividly remember laying on the lounge room floor with, you remember the old book with the with all the uni courses in it?
Yes.
And I was literally just kind of flipping through and looking at the conversations that just interest me. So I actually didn't really know what I wanted to do. I did know that I wanted to work with humans and bodies in a way that felt meaningful and there was a sense of giving back. But I actually initially started my university career in politics. I started in liberal arts. So, yeah, it was, and I don't particularly know what decision got me there when I was laying there looking at all these other options. But I think I do have a connection to the value of responsibility and where policies and processes come into there. But I think the reason I didn't survive there was because I might act around that value, but I'm not particularly good at policies and procedures.
Okay.
It's not innate in my processes.
No.
So after a year of doing that, I moved on to doing exercise sciences. And within that, I did a part of that was relating to public health and all of those types of things. But in the background, I was truly more interested in the psychology and behaviour of humans. And while we did do that as part of our course, I used to sneak into the psych component of the course. One of my great friends was doing that arm, and I would sneak in and sit in on the lectures with him because I think I just at the time didn't have whatever it takes to really commit to that as a strength of mine and admitting that that was something that I was really interested in. So I just kind of hung around on the background and got the little taste as part of the rest of the course. And then that took me through to a master's and working in the hospital system. And if we zoom forward to now, I think after running my own practice and then evolving into the version of work that I do now, which is much more behaviour oriented and human centric, it was for me understanding that the body won't respond until the mind is ready, and we have to understand how we do behaviours and why we make decisions the way we do, and what that means about the messages that we get from our body, and just these really sneaky little operation systems that we have happening underneath. But I think one of the amazing things that I love about my history when I look back on it, what's that great saying? Life has to be suffered in the moment, but you can understand it when you look back.
Yes. Yep.
This idea that I think I'm well positioned to do wonderful things with people now because I've actually seen a lot of the human potential and spectrum of suffering, working in ICU with people that are, have nearly lost their lives, and then what that looks like in then going, okay, let's look after your health now, and people just ultimately going back to what they were previously doing. And as a young clinician, that just made my brain hurt. I was like, what? Why don't you want this? I want this for you. Why don't you want this? So yeah, getting that initial aha moments and those slow trickles of relearning that until it became a conscious experience for me, was that human behaviour is really, really part of our wellness.
It's a massive part. And the fact that it's interesting what you say, because I've been through that kind of learning myself, and I just keep saying to people, until someone's ready, you can't make them do anything. It's the old saying, you can get a horse to water, but you can't make it drink. You can't make people do something that their mind is not ready for or that they're not prepared for, no matter how good you are or how much you're trying. And that's a huge thing about human psyche. That's how it works. So did you go and do more psychology after sitting in on the lectures, or have you just gained this knowledge from, the courses that you've done?
Yeah, definitely a little sprinkle of personal experience that collided well with asking for help and then going off and doing more courses. So it's probably the start of what ended up for me as burnout, and that was very much around my operating system, not realising how to adjust it. But there was a point where I very much needed support from a psychologist, so I went to see this psychologist, and I actually only had 2 or 3 sessions. Again, my operating system was very resistant, but she used the method of acceptance and commitment therapy. And I wasn't particularly good at that point at switching off from understanding and wanting to understand. So I was more interested in understanding the tool she was using. And then eventually,
I get you.
Rather than conceptualizing, learn how to feel it, Unna, which I did. But at that point, it drove me to become more interested. So I started doing my own learning and then basically putting the model back on myself. And then I went, hey, I really want to do this with my clients, so I need to do some training. So I went off, and I remember it was years and years ago, sitting in a course with Russ Harris, who's a very animated teacher and really fantastic at getting his lessons across to people, and having my first taste of many, many learnings with and courses with the acceptance and commitment therapy model. Yeah.
So we are going to talk about burnout today. So how did you know that you were burnout? Let's start with you. How did you know you reached that stage where you really need someone, even though often people don't want to? Like you say, you go and you're doing it, you're thinking you'd be able to fix yourself maybe. What was your story with that? How did you find that?
Yeah, and I think that's a tricky thing, and maybe we'll come back to it, is the scary thing about burnout is I don't know if we can save people from it. I don't know if we have the capacity as humans to know that we're deep in it without sort of resisting and trying to fix it in the ways that our operation system tells us to try and fix it. Maybe a lack of self-compassion in there. But for me, it was my body was breaking down. I had and I would say my burnout was a very slow transition over many, many years. I had a change in my work scenario where my workload went up very suddenly and the stresses went up in, tenfold, with a business partner who wasn't able to stay within the business, and a really quick transition out. And that unfortunately aligned with when my first little one was 3 months old. So my body was recovering from birth, and in that very vulnerable period and critical window of physiological change, and my mind wanting to be with my little one, but also wanting to be with my other little one, air quotes, my business that I'd spent so much time and energy on, and my clients as well. As practitioners, we're often too centered towards our clients, and we compromise ourselves within those decision-making processes. So that was the start of it, sadly. That went on for another 5 or 6 years of me just really dragging my way through it, and my body breaking down. So for me, at the very end of the story, I was less available cognitively, so decision-making and energy for my clients. And that's probably the biggest thing that I noticed, is that I didn't have what I needed to give them in the volume that my expectations and standards were used to. And the sad one that went on for ages as a symptom was that I had as much energy as I could squeeze out for my clients, but when I got home, I didn't have any energy or emotional availability for my family and my partner in particular. My social life was very much being squeezed into only when it worked around work, and less energy. So that real key idea of isolating yourself, which comes into burnout. And also, for me at the end was my body was really breaking down. I was having a lot of trouble keeping body weight on. And that was then starting to manifest, I know clinically, as a thyroid issue,
Right.
which wasn't particularly measurable, but it made me feel very anxious. Yeah, and that was driving decision making and more anxious.
So what was the moment? What was the moment where you went, oh my God, I need to do something about this? Was someone else push you, or it really has to be from you, I guess?
There was
that's what we're saying, isn't it?
Yeah, there was lots of pushes and there was lots of moments, but for me, sadly, it wasn't particularly a self-motivated decision. It was that I found out that I was pregnant with my second child, and that was 5 years later. And I can't do this again. I can't do this for my clients. I can't do this for my family. So I guess the thing I can give myself a cuddle for in reflection there is that I was able to say the values that I hold and how I operate around those values. I can't see an option where these things coming together are going to mean I can give everything I want to for my business and to my family. And physically, just I knew that I was not going to be available to return to good health in the way that my family needed me to. And that aligned also with just stars aligning really with the end of a rental period for the space that I was in. And that was the one thing that from a financial point of view, I was able to go, okay, it's easier for me to make that decision now, much, much easier. Yeah, so that was the slightly self-motivated, slightly externally motivated reason for me to pull away.
And so did you pull away totally from your business and let it sit for a while, or did you go back to it? What happened with that?
Yeah. So I had a bricks and mortar business, and that looked like Pilates and subcontractors and things like that. And I realized that as much as striving to be a business person was a little bit in me, that version of it wasn't fulfilling. So I took, and I really love thinking back on this period. My family as a total decided that we needed a sea change. So we moved out of the city to along the beautiful peninsula in Victoria. And it was like many people do, we're a bit afraid of the decision. Oh, we'll just try it for a year. We'll see how we go. And so we did that. And then not long after, a year and a half maybe after, COVID hit. So we kind of got locked into our decision a little bit in a way there. But in that initial period of moving there, I made a bargain with myself my daughter was 3 months old, and I made a commitment to myself that I wasn't going to talk about my work with anybody, and that I would often have an urge to, if people talked about their health, to contribute. And that was a driving mental load that I thought, hey, you actually need to refine that within your clinical delivery, as well as refining that in how you turn up in friendships and in your role in the community, and just offloading that mental and emotional load. Because I had this funny relationship with rightness and wrongness, which at that point had become much more user-friendly. But if we took a time machine back 10 or 15 or more years ago, I was very much tied to what a lot of young clinicians are, is that what my industry does is right and other industries do it wrong. And what I say to the client is what they should do, which was really lacking in the nuance of what does this human need from me to be able to help them to move forward. So it was just this really lovely time in this future part of me where I said, okay, no more chatting. And being able to notice the relief, initially a bit of a resistance in my body to say things and have a contribution, but it really opened up this ability to listen better and to know when to step in if I were going to say something, but I would always hold back. And that really started sculpting what I needed for my next business in my energy preservation, and what that looked like without burning out, and making really clear, deliberate, curated goals for the next part of my business life and entrepreneurial life. Yeah.
And so what does that look like now then?
Now that's working with air quotes corporate athletes.
Yes.
As well as a little bit of clinical work still. I still work with teens and young adults with a condition called POTS, and adults that are dealing with pain, and working in a really holistic way towards that. But my bigger part of my life is leaning into having a message about how we turn up for ourselves by understanding ourselves and leveraging our self-compassion, and how that manifests as wellness and the ability to be high performing, both in our career and in our lives in total. Yeah. That's
amazing. What an amazing, it's kind of like an amazing journey to a degree. But self-growth is fantastic if you can take it on, learn from it, which you have done in all these years. You're just learning the whole time, aren't you? You know, just what about yourself and the people that you're dealing with. So the people that you're dealing with, athletic-wise, how do you just sit and listen now and hear them, and do they come to you in burnout, or do you talk to them before they reach it? So how do you get these clients? How do your clients come to you?
I think that it's funny because there's athletes and corporate athletes. So these people that are up at the top of their, senior leadership and making decisions for other people, and they're really operating at a high level, which is comparable to an athlete. But it's interesting in burnout, because often when we look at people doing things that they are good at and that they love, we think that we at that point are somehow immune to burnout because we love it and we've got purpose behind it. But that actually that gives us a blind spot. that we think when we can't get to that place, or that we're somehow better than it because we can outperform it, or we operate differently to other people, that maybe sometimes we can have a little bit of judgment that people that have burnout are somehow weaker in some way, and that is not at all the case. So sort of interesting characteristics about, you know, athletes and corporate athletes, air quotes, are definitely in that burnout space. And to answer your question, can we catch them before they get burnout? I don't know. I really don't know. There are wonderful assessments that you can do, which maybe I can share you the resource to assess yourself. And, you know, green, no, I'm all good. Orange, oh, be careful. And then red, you are at high risk of burnout.
Right.
I think the challenge is that often the way we end up in burnout is that we operate in a high functioning operation level versus high performing. So high functioning is I do everything that I need to do and I tick all the boxes, but I leave nothing in the tank, and I don't have options for how to adapt and change my operating system. Whereas high performers have that ability to know what they need and know what others need around them in a way that then they can curate, you know, what's the top down, what does my brain tell me that allows me to make self-preserving decisions, and what do I know about what my body needs and the signals from my body when I'm not getting what I need to be able to make these really detailed and thoughtful decisions.
Wow. So do your people, are you training top athletes, you know, when we talk about that, and top athletes in leadership as well, but are you actually training them, or are they coming to you actually for the whole burnout issue? Are they specifically there for that, or are you training them as athletes and you throw that in if you think they're burnt out?
Yeah, it usually comes up it's interesting because I guess in the normal, the more seen corporate version of things, you come in with a topic, but often with athletes, you're coming to work on something in particular. You're learning about them by taking a more clinical history, which is maybe not as common in the corporate world, but you're getting to know them based on what the questions that we can hear solutions from based on their symptoms in their body and what their body is telling us. And then there we go, okay, there's a few warning signals that it could be A, B, or burnout. And here, let's assess which one it is so we know how we should be operating around it to bring a solution to the table. Whereas with the corporate conversation, it might be that we know it's a huge issue and that wellness-oriented businesses and senior leaders say, I want this support for my team. And when we come in and talk about that with people, we can do screenings within the sessions and then give them the skills that then they can go manifest them in their own way. And then often it might be that, you know, hey, I was an orange and I think I'm moving towards a red. You know, can we do some one-on-one work to support me to, you know, to not move further into that space with that personal responsibility that comes up with burnout, because it's not all personal responsibility, but that's not my expertise to to fix that.
Leave that one to the side. Yes.
Yeah, but it is really interesting that when we look at how someone operates around their values and beliefs, that does manifest into how they turn up, and then that manifests into culture. So there's this sort of really lovely little grey part where the human version of understanding myself and how I operate, what I need, and knowing how I impact the people around me then allows me to leverage and participate in culture or influence culture in just by doing that type of practice, which is very much an acceptance and commitment therapy staple.
So acceptance and commitment therapy, just give us a quick rundown on what that looks like.
Yeah, commitment.
If you can.
Yeah. It's a draw breath, make sure it's easy to understand. It really looks at the idea of mental flexibility. The big operating system is the idea around mindfulness and improving our ability to understand that our thoughts don't particularly define us, or they're not always helpful to pay attention to. And how do we improve our skills at being mindful, understanding how we're operating, and then working with one of the key things is that thoughts and feelings aren't particularly good or bad. It's just the workability and the actions that we take around those thoughts that become the end game. I think the best example that most people can relate to as Australians, we might go for a job interview and you might not get the job. So the feelings that come with that might drive you to go and drink alcohol. Right. Or you might get the job and the feelings that come around that might drive you to go and drink alcohol. But then when you look at what's my operating system, what matters to me, how do I act around these things? Was drinking alcohol the most productive thing to do with those feelings? And have I judged the feelings? And then, what actions follow that? And does it align with where I want to be?
Yeah, it's a huge thing. And mindfulness is like almost, sorry, I hate to be awful about it, but mindfulness is almost a word that's bandied around so much now that people ignore it. It's kind of become a term where it is so important, but it's kind of become a term that people go, oh yeah, it's past its prime, that term now, it's gone on. But I think it's amazing. It is so important, so we don't want people putting it aside and ignoring it either in that sense, So what do we do how would, say, we're listening to you now and we're going, well, how would I know if I was burnt out? What would be my symptoms? How would I recognize those? Are there some that are quite specific that I might have? And then if I do, how would I seek help if I'm not going to you? Mm-hmm. If where's that kind of help come from?
Yeah, burnout presents in stages, but I think when people usually notice it, or a leader notices it in them, is that you start basically operating outside of your normal character. It's like you've had a personality change, and it's not particularly anxiety or depression, although those can come alongside all of these ideas. But it's in the behaviours. So normally someone would come and sit in the lunchroom and share with people, and they're not doing that anymore. And it's not particularly because they don't have time; they don't have the mental and emotional energy to be around people. Some things that can, I guess it's interesting from a symptom point of view, because we can get anything that's related to stress. So that can pop up in lots of ways in people's bodies, but that isolating ourselves, we can become more, what's the word? I'm going blank, excuse me, but we can become more critical. Mm-hmm. So things that we were a good problem solver for previously, we find criticism in it. So there's this cynicism that starts presenting in the way that we operate. And I think the important thing, because people might be visualizing a particular environment here, and when we define burnout, it's not particularly, while it's defined in a workplace, it's also important to understand that that might not be the place that you earn money. So you might be a volunteer, or it can be defined in the place that I have great focus. So it can be a mother at home who's not getting the recovery that you need. So it's almost like reverse burnout, where the physiological needs for rest aren't being met, whereas potentially the difference in the workplace is the level of stresses that are there are then manifesting as physiological changes. So those are the things that pop up. I had a wonderful conversation with a lady, and again, I'm horrible with recalling names, so I'll share it with you.
That's right.
For the show notes. But she had a really interesting take because she's an ADHD specialist, and that for people with ADHD, the most helpful thing for them to notice about themselves, or for leaders and people in their teams to notice, is that often the first symptom, which becomes later for neurotypicals, is that they over-explain. So their representation of anxiety becomes over-explaining. Or I've sent an email and I've told the whole thought story, backstory to all of it, and then I'm following up with a phone call, and that again is out of character. So this idea that the mental load and overload represents itself in a really different way. And then, it's the symptoms that a lot of people notice is that they sleep but they don't feel refreshed is a really, really big one. And they start just feeling disconnected from their work, even though they would say, I started this and I do love my work. They feel really disconnected from it, right. In that workspace anyway. Yeah.
And if they were home, say they're home with a child, would they start disconnecting with their child and their family? You know, if it was not, they were like you, they'd had their 3 months off or whatever, and perhaps they were burnt out, you know, from the whole childbirth thing, would they be recognisable symptoms as well?
Yeah, and I think it would be tricky to isolate that to that. So often they might get support with burnout, but by default, because I'm going to the doctor and I'm more tired than I think I need to be, or scarily, women just go, this is what the start of mothering is. You know, I'm meant to be tired. It's meant to be tricky. So I guess it's more when we're moving further and further away from how we want to act around our values. So we're snappy, you know, we're reaching for our phone rather than being present. You know, you're at that level where you can't actually engage in the way you need to. And then that distinction starts coming up. But the motherhood example is really tricky because it can be overshadowed by other things, and that's where that what we'd call a differential diagnosis of what else could be going on that needs some support here. And like that inverse burnout or reverse burnout is, what does this person's body and mind need that then helps them to be more resilient from a lack point of view. And I think that's where maybe the nuance is interesting, because the tools might look really similar in both places, but what we're measuring as are we being effective with measurements might be different.
Yeah. No, thank you for that. Yeah, that's just so interesting. So can you just give us a tip if anyone feels that they're burnt out or they have those feelings? What would be the best thing for them to do straight away?
Yeah, I think it's important to know your tribe. So pause and sit down and name your cheerleader, name your reality checker, and name your truth teller, and come to them and say, I consider you my whichever label. I think I am burnt out. What have you got to say to me? And the truth teller might be, you know, it's clear you're burnt out. You know, we haven't seen you for months. You're making, you know, it's hard to communicate with you, that kind of stuff. Whereas the reality checker might go, hey, when we think about it, you were saying that you felt dissatisfied in your job 6 months ago, but nothing's changed. Whereas your cheerleader, your cheerleader might just come in and go, it's okay for you to take a break. They might offer you the compassion that you're struggling to give yourself that self-compassion for, because self-compassion is being shown from an evidence point of view as a really meaningful tool to allow people out of burnout from a decision-making habits point of view. But also you really should check in with your doctor. Like, that is a place where we start this initiation of what measures should be happening. And then the doctor offloads that mental load and goes, hey, here's people that you should talk to that can support you. And also it starts from I said I wasn't policies and process, but it starts that conversation about then setting you up for, you need time off work. How does that relate to the paperwork that you need for your workplace or insurances or, superannuation? What does that conversation start to look like?
Yeah. No, thanks. That's a wonderful answer. And as soon as you said that about your friend, I've got a friend that is my truth teller, my cheerleader. And that's I think many of us do have that. Thank you so much, Unna, for sharing some great information and for sharing your story too, because I think it's really important for people to understand that this happens to most of us. Like, we go through these phases in life where we're pretty hard on ourselves a lot of the time, and we don't actually know it. We're not often aware of it. So Thank you so much for sharing today.
Yeah, it's not a moral or a character failing. That's the thing I'll finish with.
That's right. Yeah. No, that's great. Thank you.
My pleasure.
As we wrap up today's episode, the good news is that burnout isn't entirely inevitable. By consciously choosing to set boundaries, practice self-care, take regular breaks, and seek social support, we can take a low-cost or no-cost step to manage our stress and prevent burnout. Paying attention to the signals that can help us catch burnout before it takes hold is really important. And by nourishing that balance, we can thrive even in modern-day challenges. Thank you for joining us, and remember to take care of both your mind and your body as you navigate the stresses of daily life. Thank you for listening to Parenting and Personalities. If you enjoyed this episode, we'd love it if you could leave a rating and a review. That would help others learn about the podcast. If you're interested in discovering more about you and your family's personality types, you'll find my book, Who Is This Monster or Treasure in My House, on Booktopia or Amazon. If you have an episode idea, please send a note to thepersonalitycoach@gmail.com. Many thanks to our producers at Stories and Strategies, and we'll see you next time.